when you first approach Tibetan history, when I first approached Tibetan history, it seemed remote and exotic, and I was interested, but I couldn't understand in the beginning why average Americans would be interested, why anyone outside of experts would care. And during the course of this, it slowly was revealed to me that, in fact, the story of Tibet, the history of Tibet, and the way Tibetans understand it, and the way Chinese understand it, and the difference between those two views are critical to the national security of the United States at this time. I honestly believe, and I hope you will buy the book and read it and see if I've convinced you, I honestly believe that this is no longer a remote issue. This has to do with you and your children in the next decade, very seriously. Whether we will have war or peace on a global scale depends on the relationship between the United States and China. And Tibet's relationship history with China, we can understand much more about the looking forward in our relationship with the Chinese Communist government of China if we understand their attitudes toward Tibet and why it's so dramatically different. So I'm going to focus on one chief thing, first of all, and then a second thing, two things, very briefly. Chinese President Hu Jintao asserted in 2005 that Tibet has been an inalienable part of Chinese territory from the time of the Mongol conquest onward. 1 billion people in China believe that Tibet, the Tibetan Plateau, this whole area here, has been part of a Chinese state for several thousand years. Sometimes they'll say it since the Tang Dynasty, 8th and 9th century. Sometimes they'll say it since the Mongol invasion. But the bottom line is that 1 billion people sincerely believe that Tibet is part of China. That's why Hu Jintao can stand up with a straight face. I honestly don't think he's a liar when he says that. The Dalai Lama never calls him a liar. He says that the truth is more complex, and he understands that Chinese have a different view of it. But the heart is that when Mongolia invaded Tibet and Korea and Vienna and Russia and Iraq and Iran and the rest of the world, Chinese have construed that history of the Mongol conquest of the known world to become a Chinese conquest. So that the Chinese conquest the Mongol conquest of everything from Korea to Vienna, in a sense, becomes a Chinese conquest. Mongols become Chinese of Mongol ethnic minority descent status. Tibetans become Chinese of Tibetan ethnic minority origins. And the invasion of Tibet becomes the peaceful liberation of Tibet in 1950. How could China invade what it's owned since the 13th century? Now, obviously, I think that's laughable. But when you have 1 billion people on this planet who believe that, if we as a nation don't know the history that gives them that certitude, we cannot construct a peaceful relationship with the nation of China or with the Chinese Communist Party. I believe this historic ambiguity and confusion here, which I think has been exploited by the Chinese Communist Party to empower its own grip on power over the Chinese people. I think this is very central for us to understand. Right now, we're doing a lot of things to empower the Chinese Communist Party's grip in China. And so that, for example, every shoe in this room and on each one of you's feet, was probably from China, unless yours was made in the U.S. or a few of us, make that choice. It's hard to find non-Chinese shoes. Why does that matter? Well, because our relationship with China, right now, we accommodate Chinese demands. Again and again, we make these micro accommodations. And so you'll remember that President Nixon, President Carter, President Bush 1, Jimmy Clinton, every president since Nixon has said, China is slowly going to absorb democratic values. Let's trade with them. And they're going to slowly absorb our values. And so here we are now, 40 years after the opening, 30 years after the opening? And instead what we're seeing is that the Chinese Communist Party is exporting its values. Now, so you see that in Burma, you see that in Sudan, in Darfur. It's a very serious issue. Where do we stand up? Where do we stand on our ideals as Americans? And obviously, this book is a long attempt to address this history, but one of the things that the Dalai Lama said to me early on in the book, and which has come to mean a great deal to me, and I think is emblematic of the wisdom that he tries to bring into the world, is this passage about the invasion of where are we? About the invasion of, here we go, the Muslim invasion of India in the 13th century. This book covers everything from the origin of man to Dalai Lama's meetings with Mao Zedong in 1950. I mean, so it's a huge, it's a huge book. And so I'm going to pick out one passage that's really come to represent. The wonderful thing about this book is you may not think you care very much about Tibetan history, and you may think that our modern relationships with China don't have very much to do with Tibet. But one of the things that's fascinating about this book is that it gives you an insight into the Dalai Lama's heart and his view of how each of us needs to act in this world. You can call it religion, you can call it wisdom. It's a fascinating way, and if you went to His Holiness and you wanted to talk to him, if Bob went to His Holiness and wanted to talk about the fifth level of enlightenment, he could probably do it. But the rest of us wouldn't be able to do that. And if the Dalai Lama gave us a very advanced teaching on on non-attachment, we wouldn't understand. We don't speak Tibetan. We haven't spent 20 years. We haven't been a monk. We haven't done all these things. And so, but when we study history with the Dalai Lama, when you ask him about very specific things like the death of 1 million Tibetans over the last 50 years, when you ask him about the destruction of Buddhism in India in the year 1300 by these Muslims' invasion, it gets very specific. And even you and I, the simple people like me, I can understand. And one thing that he says about, I had been raised, I grew up in Asia and had slowly, was really stunned by the idea that, Buddhism emerged in the few hundred years, 400 years before the time of Christ, developed for 800 years, and then 1,200 years after its birth, Buddhism is completely erased in India. It vanishes. When the Brits come in the 17th, 18th century, no, Buddhism, they don't even know the name of this. It's gone. Buddhism continued, preserved in Laos, Tibet, China, Japan, but it vanished in its homeland. Vikramashila was the last of the great Buddhist monasteries in India to be destroyed by the invading Muslims. And at the monastery, when the Muslims came in, they burnt every book, they destroyed every statue, they tore down these hundreds of temples so completely we've never found Vikramashila. So I said to him, don't you blame the Muslims for this? And he said, no, nothing is caused by one factor. And he lists the many factors that led to the destruction of Buddhism. He said, the Muslims were one factor, but there was also the weaknesses within the Buddhist community in India. There was corruption. People had a tendency towards other religious traditions. And I was surprised at this. And I said, really? You don't blame the Muslim invasions at all? And he says, quote, I think in the Tibetan case also, just as with the Indian case, there is a tendency to look at the external causes. Let me parse that for you. The Tibetan case, the death of 1.2 million people, the invasion by China, and then the destruction of 90% of the Tibetan monasteries, the burning of the texts, 50 years of cultural genocide in Tibet. I think in the Tibetan case also, just as with the Indian case is the complete destruction of Buddhism in India, right? I think in the Tibetan case, 1.2 million people dead. There's a level of non-attachment here that you and I really won't approach in our life. I mean, someone comes up and punches us in the nose, and we want to go beat up their grandmother. We don't have the emotional maturity to let someone hit us on one cheek and then turn the other cheek. Not many of us can really practice that. It's difficult. I think in the Tibetan case also, just as with the Indian case, there is a tendency to look at the external causes. The tendency to look at external forces first is deeply rooted in the human mind and difficult to eliminate. We cannot do so much about others, about external forces, but then ourselves. If we do not practice well, if we are not disciplined, then our religion becomes hypocritical. This is real. So this is the real history of Buddhism in India and Tibet. Let me change one word. We cannot do so much about others, about external forces, but then ourselves. If we do not practice well, if we are not disciplined, then our democracy becomes hypocritical. Then our family becomes hypocritical. Then our marriage becomes hypocritical. Then our job becomes... If you don't take responsibility in every action of your life, everything that you hold dear from the larger community, from your democracy, from the values this nation is founded on, becomes hypocritical. We must always be, and this, we're not Tibetans, we're not Chinese, but as Americans, we have a relationship with China. We have a responsibility to look at that relationship with China and wonder, are our ideals becoming abused for cheap shoes? Is that what we're doing? You know, if this book was printed in the United States, a certain amount of energy would be used to make it. The energy for that would probably come from, if it came from coal-fed factories, it would be under EPA regulations to reduce carbon emission. Right now, an estimated 40% of the carbon emissions coming out of China are for your products, for our products. That means that we've offshored not just the jobs from the United States, we've offshored our pollution. The corporations have done an end run around a century of social progress, unions, the EPA regulations. So there's a reason the shoes are cheap, and it's not just because people are working in slave conditions to produce them. It's because the air is being polluted because it's cheaper for them, for the corporations, to make a profit this quarter. You can't blame the corporations. They're doing what's good for this quarter, but we as a people, we as Americans, we have to look, what are we going, the next quarter? What about the next quarter millennia? Do we have a responsibility to defend democracy, to defend the thing? You may think it's a big step, that the history of Tibet has nothing to do with any of that. I believe you'd be wrong. I honestly believe that we cannot go forward in our relationship with China in a peaceful means unless we understand why has Chinese government treated the Tibetan people the way they have? What does that tell us about what they're doing in Darfur, in Sudan? What does that tell us about what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan? The Dalai Lama offers us a way through history, through other teachings that he gives. He offers us a way towards wisdom. Whether you're Christian or Buddhist, to him, it's not the issue. But are we kind to one another? Are we thinking about conserving this planet? Are we standing up for the ideals? This is an amazing man. The Dalai Lama is truly an amazing man. And I think that by studying the history of Tibet with him, if you buy this book, that you can actually gain much more than you might think. And I encourage you to do so. And that's my 20 minutes.
Really nice, Tom. Actually, Tom's book, I'm quite familiar with it, because I had a chance to read it quite a lot in galley form and this and that. And it is really a wonderful book. You know, he's very modest about it, but Tibetans believe that if you spend an hour with the Dalai Lama, that you lose like 100 lifetimes of bad karma. So Tom spent many, many hours, so you're clicking along there, Tom. And I'm sure it'll stand you in good stead in the next life, you know, and many next lives, or whatever, on your way to Buddhahood. And when you read the book, you really get a sense of how the Dalai Lama sees the world, and of course how he sees his own country is very endearing and wonderful. And the passage you read was nice because it relates to how a person lives, you know, instead of the story. But the story itself is magnificent, the story of Tibet. It's really, really amazing. And I remember I couldn't believe it. Tom when Tom heard about Tom's book, I was totally delighted that we would all get a vision and get a chance to share with the Dalai Lama, share the Dalai Lama's view of the world. It's really, really something special. Now, where my book fits, it fits very nicely with Tom's book, and where it fits is it has to do with where we go from now in relation to that story. And the fact is that China is occupying Tibet, and since 1993, since the Soviet Union devolved into the Russian Federation, Deng Xiaoping, who was still alive at that time, although quite elderly, was frightened that should there be a perestroika, a restructuring of China, that they might lose these border areas. But of course, Tibet is a bit more than a border. Look at this first map. I'm sorry for the slide is like this, but that should be the whole screen, and you'd really get more of an impression. I don't know why it won't go into slideshow mode, but never mind. At least you're seeing it. You see that huge thing that looks like a giant, I don't know what, a pheasant lying on its side, or a dragon actually. If you see it, that's Tibet. That's the Tibetan plateau. The earth is twice as thick there as it is anywhere else on the entire mantle of the earth, because the Indian plate is moving, slowly but inexorably and plowing under the Asian plate and pushing it up. So the Himalayas are growing, and that's where that earthquake occurred on this, over on the tail feathers here, over on the edge. And it's a very earthquake-prone area, very, very volatile. And you can see how huge it is. Look at the size of it compared to India, the size of it compared to the green part of China, which is really most of the traditional areas of China. China, the Chinese civilization is very unique in Eurasia, even in the world. It's the only major civilization in history that was not built on a symbiosis between the nomadic pastoral upland people, herders, and lowland farmers, river valley farmers. And they never drank milk in their history, in their diet. It's not in the Chinese. The Chinese are lactose intolerant. And they never drank milk. And they're the only ones to build a wall against the upland people. The Great Wall of China is a wall against the upland type of people. So their culture is a very special, wonderful culture within the rice culture space. A very marvelous rice and millet in the north. But so therefore, if you were a ruler of China, look at the size of Tibet. And then that desert area above it is Xinjiang, where the Uyghur people live, Turkish people really, Turkish Muslims. And they feel that's kind of connected to Tibet. If they lost Tibet, they would lose the Uyghurs. And then the whole northern band there, going all the way over to north of Korea, is Inner Mongolia. Above that, and those three areas constitute more than half of what nowadays is called China's territory. And so Deng Xiaoping got nervous, and he just said we have to colonize Tibet very intensively now. We have to really move a lot of people up there. So let's develop the West. And he started the train project to build a train. He started subsidizing very intensively Chinese colonists to go up and settle up there. And that policy, going since 1993 or so until today, is what caused the recent uprising in Tibet. The complete swamping of the Tibetans by Chinese. The true figures are not available. You will not get them from the Chinese, the Chinese government media. And they really are already outnumbering the Tibetans there, and they're flowing in at a high rate. But it's a huge waste of money, because guess what? Mao's Louisiana Purchase, as I like to call it, although he didn't pay $15 million for it. But his Louisiana Purchase is 3 miles high average altitude, or a little less, 14,000 feet. And there's less than half the oxygen that you have here in Atlanta. And you get chronic mountain sickness if you try to live there for a long time. CMS, they call it. You know it's a real thing when they have an acronym. And ladies cannot produce babies there. The placenta won't form well. They have to go to be pregnant safely. They have to go down lowland, except for the exceptional case. And it's really, as I like to say, if it could be intensively populated, Tibet, there would have been 100 million Chinese there 500 years ago. Because there's lots of people, they just walk. They don't need airplanes and trains and things. They would just go with their wagons, like the American pioneers went west. And Iowa is sea level, more or less, or a little bit more, and then waving fields of grain, All you have in Tibet is waving tails of yaks. That's about it. And they don't eat yak, they don't drink yak milk. or dream milk, the female yak, you know. So anyway, it's impractical, this kind of handling. And the Chinese scientists in Xining and Chengdu and in Beijing themselves are saying that the attempt to intensively populate the high plateau is not feasible, and it ruins the environment. It makes a desert, it deforests the trees, and it dries up the glaciers faster than global warming would be drying them up anyway. And it's depleting the headwaters of the Yellow River and the Yangtze River and all of the Chinese rivers. And not to mention all the Indian rivers, all the Southeast Asian, Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, they all get their water. About 4 billion people get their water from Tibet, so it cannot really be messed up. It's like the water tower of Asia, as somebody very well said. So that's kind of futile. So anyway, the Dalai Lama has been misrepresented, and even the Tibetan movement has sometimes it misrepresents itself, has been misrepresented as being something that is against China. And that is not the case. The Dalai Lama likes China. He likes the Chinese. He, in fact, annoys some of us by constantly saying how he liked Mao. If those of us who know more about how Mao was actually behaved, we don't like Mao. But he says he liked him. He had ideals. He was trying to do something. Of course, he went crazy, he admits. And, of course, the violence was no good. But the Dalai Lama is trying to really practice love thine enemy. Did you ever hear that expression? Maybe you might have heard that from Jesus. I believe in Matthew, he says, I'm not impressed that you love your friends. Anybody can do that. I would like to see it if you could love your enemies, he says. That's the real test of being a Christian, actually, following these. That's what Jesus said. He never said, bomb thine enemy. Never once. And he wouldn't have said it, and we shouldn't be doing it. But anyway, the Dalai Lama tries to live that and actually loves his enemy, the Chinese. And he wants them to have a good time. He wants them to be wealthy and prosperous. He supported them having the Olympics. He refused to support, in the Tibetan movement, the idea to condition most favored nation status in the late 70s, early 80s, when it would have really been a pinch on China. He wanted them to have wealth and to succeed. And he feels they're 1/5 of humanity. They are a great nation from their past history. They should be able to hold their head up and be proud and be a great nation. On the other hand, he feels to be a great nation, they should be able to tolerate dissent. They should be able to tolerate people being their own people being free. And they shouldn't be just crushing any kind of thing, and they certainly shouldn't crush spirituality. The Chinese have a great tradition of spirituality. They were Buddhist, 700 million Buddhists, probably in China. And as Buddhists, they were very, very tolerant, and they were sometimes Taoist. You were Taoist when you got married. You were Confucian when you went to the office. You were a Buddhist at your funeral. And maybe in between, if you decided to meditate or learn something, you'd be Buddhist. And they have a famous thing of being tolerant of religion, the Chinese, traditionally in their culture. It's a wonderful culture. They actually, to show the Americans a lesson, they actually invented gunpowder long before anybody in Europe, and they didn't use it for war for hundreds of years, just firecrackers. And it isn't that they were too stupid. They invented it. They're not too stupid to use it for war, but they're not like us. We invent something and we got to use it. Or somebody else will, even if it's an A-bomb, an H-bomb, any kind of bomb, we got to drop it. We got to try it out. We're Americans. And we have no self-restraint, in other words. But you know what I mean? We're a little bit Rambo-ish, aren't we? Aren't we a bit of a Rambo country? And they were more civilized. In ancient time, then they got Marxist and materialist and unrestrained capitalism and from us, and they're being worse us than we are at the moment. And so we and they have to change our ways if we're going to save this planet, and if our care for our great-grandchildren and grandchildren and even maybe children at this point is going to be more than just words, We're going to really have to turn off a few switches and do without a few things, and they are too, Al Gore said in the Nobel Prize address in Norway, the two worst polluters are us and the Chinese, and as Tom said, a lot of their pollution comes from producing things for Walmart, for us. So I wanted to, but anyway, the Dalai Lama, now people always ask the Dalai Lama, how can you be so cheerful? What makes you so jolly and happy? Are people getting killed? They're being depressed? And that you're not free and China chases you around, When the Dalai Lama comes to Emory, the Chinese consulate will run over here and say, you're interfering in our internal affairs, and scold the president of Emory and tell the Chinese students in Emory to run out and make a protest because the bad, nasty, mean Dalai Lama is coming. And they don't know that that's just silly, because everybody knows Dalai Lama's a really cute guy. And he's very friendly, and he's not trying to do anything to anybody. But they have this false idea. So I wanted to show how much he is for the Chinese, and actually how much, in the Chinese' own enlightened self-interest, a proper dealing with the Tibet situation would be in their benefit, and would not be bad for them. Sinologists will scowl, and they'll say, Tibet is hopeless. It's all finished, lost cause. All those weird hippies with their flags saying free Tibet, they're crazy. And actually, even the hippies with the free Tibet, they'll say free Tibet, free Tibet. Then you ask them, will it be free? Oh, no, never happened. They say, oh, no, China's too big, can't do anything. That's not realistic. Something. Actually, it is realistic. It is realistic that unrealistic policies of governments today, who still think that you can make war and win, who still think you can spend all your money on a military budget and that makes you happier and safer, who still think they can suppress everybody and control what they think and so on, which are sort of 20th century ideas, I think, actually, and not applicable anymore in this century, because we have the internet, because we're going to think what we think, because war is not cost effective. Because did you notice nobody's winning them nowadays? Have you noticed that? We bombed the smithereens in Vietnam. We did not win. The Russians poured treasure into Afghanistan. They did not win. I hear something about victory in Iraq, but I don't know. Victory over the Gila monsters in the desert? I'm not sure what there could be victory over that's left there. 5 million internal refugees, over 1 million people killed, not soldiers, civilians. I mean, the people filled with wish for vengeance and so forth, just biding their time. There's no such thing as victory in such a ridiculous adventure to try to get some oil, and which is already, anyway, $135 a barrel. It's just really silly. And so nobody's winning these wars because there's a reason for that. It isn't just that some idealist took over or Jesus arrived. It's because war now is too powerful. And it's not against soldiers in the field anymore. 90% of casualties in wars today are the civilians. You destroy the enemy country if you make a war on somebody. And therefore nobody will obey what you say. They're just completely mad. If somebody came in here to conquer Atlanta and destroyed Atlanta, which Atlantan would want to go and work for them? I think not. You know, they blew up your grandma, and they blew up your children, and they blew up your house. You would be hell-bent, unless you were practicing Buddhism or Christianity, you'd be hell-bent for revenge, and you would not be sitting there like me sewing a flag for the winner. You would not. And neither will the Iraqis or anybody makes war on nowadays. There's a lot of social science that proves that. But, you know, the governments, oh no, we're going to be superpowers. They're into superpowerhood. Now, Dalai Lama is not into superpowerhood. Dalai Lama has no country, no budget, nothing. He's cheerful, and he sees things working out. And he sees how the Chinese could do it. So I have a plan. Can you click forward in the thing? I really present, he has something called a middle way. Now, there are many elements. I don't think I have time. I will not have time to really go through all the elements of my plan. Some of these maps are showing how the Tibetan plateau is really all Tibetan. Because there's some areas of the Tibetan plateau, more than half of it actually, that the Chinese in the 50s split off into these other, what are called Tibet autonomous prefectures of Qinghai, Sichuan, Gansu, and Yunnan, 4 Chinese states. And therefore now they're saying when they negotiate with Dalai Lama, oh, Dalai Lama is trying to take away our territory. Because these are autonomous prefectures of these states. But actually they're Tibetan autonomous prefectures. They're over 13,000 feet, 14,000 feet high. And Chinese people can't live there. Before 1950, no Chinese people lived in Tibet, except short-term stationed, military station or trader or something. No one lived there. How could it be China? They didn't live there. You know? It's like, it's just on paper, some treaties and some things, some gifts sent back and forth. Some guy in Beijing writing, oh, we just sent a gift to Tibet. We now own the country. I mean, give me a break. It's silly. And Genghis Khan, if someone told Genghis Khan he was a Chinese, he would have apoplexy. He was a Mongolian. You know, that's like totally different. And when a Chinese person today meets a Mongolian person face to face, neither one thinks the other one is the same nation. They don't. And even in their language in Chinese, they call themselves a multinational nation. They don't mind that little contradiction, because that means they're different nations. You follow me? But they're supposed to be united in a federation. Okay? So they don't say multinational federation, which they should. They say multinational nation. But the second nation is hollow because they're really different. Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and Manchurians are different people. They are not Chinese people. So Anyway, so then this shows this the altitude. The hatched area is all over 13,500 feet, and therefore unlivable by you, me, or any Chinese who lives at sea level, and therefore they'll never colonize it. Then, okay, these are just some pictures of the nature, which is fine. You can crank through. Then this is the ethnic map of Tibet, showing how they are in their costumes in all the parts of Tibet. Just to show you, the whole highland was basically inhabited by these highland people. Now keep going. Where's my list? Keep going. Oh, I don't have. There's the Dalai Lama getting his prize. Oh, keep going. Here we go. 5 steps for China. That's the one I want up there. Okay. You have to keep pressing it to get the steps to come out. It's weird, this machine. It's not acting like. Well, here's the steps, but you can't see them. So, I have 5 steps. Oh, good. Well, you have to keep going. Ding, ding, ding. But it's not working. Never mind. Anyway, the point is that there are 5 things for Hu Jintao to do, all of which are cost-effective for the Chinese. Reunite administratively the autonomous prefectures with the autonomous region. That's just a bureaucratic thing, stroke of a pen. Nobody's taking any territory from anybody. The Dalai Lama is unifying. 2/3 of the Tibetan people live in the autonomous prefectures, only 1/3 in the region. So he has to unify them so he can make a deal for them. This is the Dalai Lama's offer. It's not mine. I didn't invent this. It's his offer. But he doesn't put it together like this. So far, this is it. So then give them the one country, 2 systems thing like they have in Hong Kong, where the Tibetans have their own local government. Mao himself in 1951, he did that for the Tibet Autonomous Region. He didn't include those areas they broke off, but which was a mistake because then he didn't treat them in the same way he treated the center. So therefore that's where the fighting started. So because his people started destroying the religion there. But Tibetans don't like it when you destroy Buddhism. They don't like it when you destroy their lamas, when you destroy their Buddhists, their temples. They like Buddhism. Buddhism is like Buddha is like Jesus for them. They like him, and they don't want you trampling on him, And then the 3rd step is move the poor Chinese settlers who have chronic mountain sickness back to low altitude so they can breathe again. And here the train comes in real handy. They get on the train and go home. We like the train. And the soldiers go home too, who are inside. They can leave soldiers on the frontier pending the plebiscite. But he's fine. Chinese sometimes say he wants us to give up defense and everything. Then all those Indian yogis will invade Tibet and take it away. You can see a bunch of Indian yogis in their loincloths running up and conquering Tibet. I don't think so. It's too high for the Indians as well. So he has to remove them, and he saves a fortune. He doesn't have to pay the soldiers to be there. He doesn't have to pay the settlers subsidies to go and settle there. And then the Tibetans living in their own land and having their own police and their own internal security, and they'll be fine. And step 4 for them is to mend relations with the Dalai Lama, apologize for calling him a wolf, a jackal, and a demon. I think we've all seen him here at Emory. He's a professor at Emory. Hey, we don't hire wolves and jackals and demons over at Emory. No way. They have all nice bodhisattvas, all the teachers at Emory. And so, now you figured out how to click it. There you go. There it is. And then 5 is prioritize environment. This is one of my favorite things. Hu Jintao and the Dalai Lama, when I have to show the 5 steps for Dalai Lama, but after they've gotten together, they're getting it on, they're big buddies, they have garden parties together, tea parties, they travel around, then they're going to make a special thing, they're going to call over Al Gore, and they're going to present the entire plateau to the planet as the largest environmental preserve on Earth. And that means that they can still mine minerals, because there's a lot of minerals they want in Tibet, but they have to mine clean. And then foreign companies can go in and help them with the best modern mining equipment, none of this throwing the stuff around in the rivers. And they'll mine clean and green, and the Tibetans will control that mining. And the Tibetans will get a royalty, but the investors will get their royalty. It'll be done in a normal, easy way. Nobody needs to guard it, no police, no army, no soldiers. And so the whole thing is presented to Al Gore, and I want Al Gore up there receiving Tibet and going around and checking it out as environment at least a month or 2, and then he'll lose at least 30 pounds or 50 pounds, because being at that high altitude is a weight loss program, absolutely. You don't eat that much, you don't have much appetite, you hike around, you lose weight. It's really great. That's the only reason I'm alive now, is I go up there every once in a while, go on a hike, and lose 10, 15 pounds. So that's what he does. Now, Dalai Lama, in response, he goes and he tours Tibet, and that will be the party of the planet. I'm telling you, the morphic resonance of the joy of the Tibetans when they have the Dalai Lama back, they're going to go flip out. It's going to be a be-in, a love-in, I don't know what you're going to call it. It's going to be like ultimate thing. Really, it will. It'll be totally fantastic. And they'll be so happy. That's why the Chinese security, People's Armed Police, cannot be there. Because when the Tibetans start rejoicing, it gets very energetic. Have you ever seen the Tibetans do the yak dance? Has Geshe Negi brought the dancers here from Dharamsala who do the yak dance? Have you ever seen that? That's pretty like they do the yak dance, you know. They're going to really do a yak dance when Dalai Lama goes back. And the energy of that will freak out the Chinese police who are used to controlling people. They're going to be like, oh, stop that. That's unseemly energy. Something go wrong if you do that. And then they'll have a big riot. You know, it'll be terrible. So second, you reward the Chinese leadership. What that means is, once this would happen, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela and Betty Williams and Elie Wiesel and Jimmy Carter, I bet Jimmy will join. Well, I was hoping he'd be here so I would see if he would join, but I bet he would. If they would make a switch like this in their policy, instead of being colonialist, crushing the Tibetan people, trying to replace them with Chinese people, make the Tibetans not Tibetans by taking away their lamas and their Buddhism, if they're going to at least leave a few live Tibetans there. That stupid policy, which is, of course, no more stupid than, as they say, than a lot of our policies and a lot of Russia's policies and other countries' policies and the whole British Empire and all the other empires. But it's past the time for that. It's no longer in fashion, that sort of thing. You know, we have CNN everywhere, you know, watching your colonialists, and it doesn't work. So if they really change, then they will all be nominated by those guys I mentioned and ladies that I mentioned for Nobel Peace Prize. And President Hu will get to go to Norway, glug down some aquavit, and have some smelly fish with the Norwegians, and he will get a Nobel Peace Prize because the most important nomination are past Nobel Peace Prize winners, and those will all nominate him. I know Dalai Lama will. You know, I mean, he didn't tell me he would, and I can't really promise for him, although I also will nominate. Religion professors can also nominate, religious studies professors. Political scientists can't. But religious studies professors can. They'll accept nomination from them. I know because I nominated people. And then he will, you know, Chinese are always talking about national unity and spiritual well-being. Well, the Tibetan people will be so happy to be free on their own territory, in their own land. And then the Chinese will still be there. They have troops on the border defending them against the mad Indian Yogi army. And the Chinese will be still sending funds and helping them out. And maybe they have to take down some of the bad buildings that they build, which will fall down in the next earthquake. And they should be rebuilt in the Tibetan architectural way, but that's another matter. That, you know, to restore the damage they've done in Tibet in 50 years will be a huge thing. So the Dalai Lama will want them to do that restoration, and they will. But this will increase the unity and the spiritual well-being of the Chinese. Then the Dalai Lama can go, and the Chinese rulers are a little bit in a bind now, you know, because they're supposed to be Communist Party, right? Meanwhile, they are just total capitalist oligarchs, if there ever were any. And nobody in China has a communist ideology like, oh, let's do this for the people. They're all trying to make money like mad, and it's a wild, you know, free-for-all scramble, if you've ever read any articles about it, that's destroying their own environment, actually. And they're overworking themselves, a bunch of workaholics. And they need stress-free living, you know, some yoga teaching and a few things, but they're just overworking, you know. So the point is and their leadership has no ideology or no idealism or nothing to offer them as to why they are doing that, besides just to get rich is glorious, as Deng Xiaoping said. But they're not all getting rich at all. There's 1.1 billion who are not getting rich, who are getting exploited and who are poorer than ever, in the peasants in the field, whose land is taken by communist officials to build condos and things, and all kind of workers who work 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, and don't get anything much. There's a lot of discontented people. So those people, what do? Religion, spirituality. You can't give them all a Mercedes. You can't give them all huge salaries. But you can not be quite so rough with them as they are being now, and you can let them have the Dharma. They can do their Qigong. Peace. Have you seen them, the Chinese people in the park? Having a happy time doing Qigong. Have you ever seen it? It's very nice. It makes you feel better. You know? Move your arms like that. Feel the energy of the cosmos flowing through your channels. Helps your arthritis and all your worries. It's really nice. And then now they're arresting them for doing that, you know. Falun Gong, they're so bad in spirituality. Because Marx said it was the opiate of the people. But we'll just rename it. We'll call it the Prozac of the people. And then that'll be fine, and they'll be happy. And then the rulers, like the Chinese emperors did, will get the prestige of sponsoring it. So they'll be bringing the Dalai Lama to their people. And when the Dalai Lama visits Taiwan, if you've ever seen it, it is super high intensity charisma, because you understand the Dalai Lama is the incarnation of Guan Yin. That's a Chinese savior figure. So it's better than the Pope for them. The Pope is only representative of Christ, vicar of Christ. But the Dalai Lama is the actual incarnation of their savior figure, which is Kuan Yin in the Chinese, or Avalokiteshvara, thousand-armed bodhisattva. So they go nuts when he goes there. And the Chinese Buddhists will go absolutely nuts with joy when they see their figure. And the Chinese leaders will get the thing. Now, this fourth one is really important. So we got a Nobel Prize for the rulers. And then the fourth one is, what do the Chinese want? They feel, you remember that first picture, they want to feel that they own that huge thing, even though they can't live on it, that plateau, they want to feel they own it. So Dalai Lama is practical. He's not saying independence, we're going to take it away from you. Did you lose that? No. He says not only can you own it, but you can own it legitimately. You don't have to go making some ridiculous business about history, how Genghis Khan was Chinese. You don't have to do that, which nobody believes. It's like a laugh. Yul Brynner played Genghis Khan, We know that. He wasn't Chinese. And our American sense of history comes from the movies, And so, but the point is, he would organize a plebiscite. He's promised to do that. And he would campaign in that plebiscite for the Tibetan people as a whole, all of them, the Eastern Tibet and Central Tibet, to vote, we want to be a state of China's, with our one country, two system, with our internal autonomy. That means we're deciding our own fate, managing our own economy, preserving our own environment. We want one country, two system, but we want to be part of China. They mess us up, they can help fix us up. And they're very prosperous now, and we want to join with them. And besides, they changed from being militaristic and colonialist and nasty, and they got nice. And they left. And they left the place to us, and now we can fix it up again. And they apologize. And even they're Buddhist, and they're now being Buddhist. So they'll be nice to us in the future. So we vote to join. This then would give the Chinese legitimate sovereignty in Tibet, which is what they desperately want, because it would be by modern self-determination by a plebiscite. And this is where I have a job for Jimmy. Jimmy's going to go watch the plebiscite to make sure it's fair and square. I hope. He better send his team. Isn't that what he does? He goes here from the Carver Center and he checks the elections. So he would check that election. And anybody who didn't know the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people might think the Chinese were taking a risk by allowing such a thing as such a plebiscite. But anybody who knows them and the Dalai Lama will know there's no risk. There will be some Tibetans who will say, I don't want to be told China, no matter what. I hate them. They killed my uncle and all this. There will be some. But they campaigning against Dalai Lama, it's like Ron Paul or Dennis Kucinich against Obama. Forget about it. Forget about it. Dalai Lama says, we can join China. Yes, we can. And they go, bam, yes. 99.99% will vote yes. So then China will really have the satisfaction of owning Tibet in a modern, legal manner, rather than this nonsense about how they conquered it when the Mongolians conquered them, actually. Much to their own discomfort. They were very unhappy when the Mongolians sat on them, believe me. And finally, the Dalai Lama, now in the future, the next couple of decades, as Tom said, absolutely rightly, one of the most important things of this century is all the white people accepting the yellow people as an equal. No more washing your shirts only. No more just cooking nice food without MSG, hopefully. No more of that. But of course they still will do that because they do it well. But they're going to be a major economic power, a major cultural force, a major force on this planet. There's no question. And the Europeans and the Americans and the Russians, we'll have our levels of where we're equal and we'll share with them. And they'll share with us. But it will not be any sort of domination. There's no such this one superpower theory of some lunatics that I could mention by name, but I won't. Because actually they were my mothers in a former life. So I have to think kindly of them. That's a ridiculous idea. Nobody can dominate this planet anymore. Everyone will be equal on this planet, and especially China will be more equal than equal. There's 1.234 by soon there'll be 1.4 billion of them. And they're very clever and intelligent, and they're very civilized if they would find their own civilization, not Marx, not Mao, not Lenin, not Stalin, but their own Chinese civilization before they were infected by all of these other Western ideas that made them lose their knowledge of their own wonderful civilization. So therefore, because they're going to be so powerful, and because we're going to have a hard time with that, because we're the superpower, blah, 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 Rambo and everything, and which we're sick of ourselves, actually, and our wives are really sick of it. even if a few of the boys aren't, if they dared say. And so there has to be mediation when there's conflicts. There's going to be conflicts and issues. Who in the next 20 years, and he promised to work for another 20 years or 30 years if necessary, who would be a better goodwill ambassador in this world than the Dalai Lama for the Chinese people? He's beloved in all the European capitals, in Japan, here. Russians like him very much. Putin is behaving strangely. Yeltsin loved him. And Gorbachev likes him. He's a fellow Nobel Prize laureate, and they're very big buddies. But the current Russian government, having been pushed into a corner a little bit by us, is behaving a little bit badly. So they don't know him yet. And one group of leaders that doesn't know the Dalai Lama is the Chinese group. They've never first actually met him. If they met him, this will change the whole thing. So this is my plan anyway. And the point of the book, if you read this, this is just the main points. If you read it, and this is a picture. Yeah, can you flip this one up? I love this picture. This is an impressionistic painting by a dear friend of mine, Alex Gray, which shows the Dalai Lama with the Potala behind him, a transparent Dalai Lama with rainbows coming out of his heart of happiness, and his Messiah figure, the Avalokiteshvara of 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes and 11 heads behind him, and the cityscape of Lhasa behind him, and he's looking happy, and he is like in Tibet, and he's sending out goodwill from Tibet, and he's helping mediate between China and Russia, U.S., India, solve the Indian border problem with the Chinese in 2 minutes, and then once the Chinese get the hang of being nice and decide they're really going to be nice, then there's a wonderful domino effect. They'll have a peaceful settlement with the Uyghurs right away, because the Uyghurs will say, oh, the Tibetans got to be free in their own land, then they would become enthusiastic about being part of China, so we'll do that. You leave us free in our desert there, and we'll be enthusiastic. Mongolians get the same idea, Manchurians get the same idea, Taiwanese get the same idea, solve the Taiwan problem 100%, because the Chinese need to get the trust of these people. How do you get trust? You can, when you have something in your power, in your hand, and you're crushing it, and then saying, I'm trustworthy. You can hang with me. I'm safe. I'm easy. I'm nice. Crush, crush, crush. You can hire Hill and Knowlton to do PR for you and say, I'm nice. I'm trustworthy. And you're crushing. People are not going to believe you no matter how big a PR budget you have. The one way you can be believed is what you have in your hand that you could crush, you open your hand and you let it flourish on the palm of your hand. And the Dalai Lama has been people can dance and flourish on the palm of great giant China's hand. And then Taiwan cannot mistrust them. And Japan cannot, and South Korea cannot. And then immediately North Korea, that dingbat up there, that guy, he wants to be an actor anyway. He does. He wants to do vaudeville. We lost George Carlin, we'll have him. And then you go down to the Burmese junta, we can send them to Hawaii, next door to Imelda. And then we're moving on, we get to Sudan. It's a little more difficult, but that's pretty easy too. Take away their helicopters and get them to relax. And one after another, these difficult situations can be worked on by goodwill, kindness, intelligence, negotiating some hard points, and that's the world. And then, given that example, our new government can start relaxing. We can, they say, oh, so complicated. How can we possibly get out of Iraq? Oh, I don't know. Well, yes, you can walk to Jordan. You can take a boat out the Persian Gulf. You can get in an airplane and fly to Germany. You can leave. And then they'll sort themselves out in a few weeks. A little bit of blam showdown in the midday. But then they'll be over with it because we won't be there pumping them with more guns and whatever. And that'll be done. And then we'll have to be rebuilding all the things we trashed and destroyed. We'll have to rebuild that. That'll be a little less expense for us. Not to mention the lives of so many families in our own country crippled and maimed, not just the ones killed and so on. But that we'll have to repair that. It's all right. Can't help it. Some people operated like they were like 300 years ago, and they somehow got control of us. But we're not going to give them control forever, are we? I hope not. Down here in Atlanta. You better not. So, okay. So that's it. And that's why the Dalai Lama matters. Because he inspires us all, not just the Chinese. He inspires us all to make sure that even in our own home, peace reigns. And the bullies and the tough guys relax. And they don't crush what they could crush. And everybody's happy. Okay? Is that good? In fact, my final line of the book is, it is our duty to be happy. And it is our duty to be so happy that no one can rule us by fear. And so, that you have to be happy to a real extent, which we all are capable of. And we're so happy that even they kill us, we'll die happy. That's my final thing. What do you want to live for if you're miserable? Okay, so we take questions. All right? Thank you, Tom. So we take some questions if there are questions. If not, we will meditate. Right here. Yes. Okay. Okay. How much influence will Chinese intellectuals have on the government is her question. Is that right? Tom, you want to weigh in on that?
Well, the Dalai Lama says that he's hearing from a lot of Chinese intellectuals. He gets letters from Chinese leaders. There's many of people in China are inclined towards Buddhism, and as people grow wealthy, of course, it's the upper middle class that turns towards religion to solve their problems. So there is that idea that through religion, perhaps this can come about. But at this point, as we all know, the party is not paying any attention to the intellectuals. I don't. And at this point, the party is, exploiting Burma, using the generals to take the oil out. I think that a resolution of the situation in Burma requires resolution of the situation in China, just as with Tibet. So the intellectuals, of course, all intellectuals have a duty to try and temper their government, as we here in the United States have the same duty. How effective that's going to be? Well, the last time, they shot them in Tiananmen. So it's Bob?
Well, yeah, but I think the fact that they are there and they will continue. The fact that now there are, over at Emory we're having a conference, and there are some young Chinese scholars from Beida, that's a Beijing university, and other universities who are studying Buddhism, who are good scholars. They know Sanskrit, they know Tibetan. They don't really, we wouldn't even want to ask them their political view because we wouldn't want them to get into trouble. But inevitably, so in the past, Chinese have been sending people here to learn physics, chemistry, biology, all these things to deal with, get our military and commercial secrets, and electronics and computer science. But we're beginning to see a trickle of humanists and a trickle of people looking at culture and so on, and they may be even learning their own culture. And we're seeing them learning that in Beijing and so on, and in those great universities there, and they're spending a lot of money on their universities. And so it's inevitable that they will have an impact. It's just a matter of time when it is, when it happens. And some Sinologists say that Hu Jintao, in those things you were mentioning, Tom, that's the momentum of the older party members and the PLA. And the PLA, it's like our military-industrial complex. The People's Liberation Army owns a lot of corporations. They're the ones who cut the trees in Tibet. They're the ones who desertify the land by getting into the meat business. They're the ones who build the infrastructure for the colonists. So they're making money in Tibet. China's losing money as a nation, but they're making money. And as someone said, they are the Halliburtons, the Kellogg, Brown, and Roots of the Chinese. And the mere president of China can't necessarily control them too easily or quickly, they say. But I think actually they could maybe switch it around more quickly because they're in a hard place, the Chinese, because they have, it's even in the Wall Street Journal, they have 80,000 incidents last year, I think, or 85,000 of riots and people freaking out and they're being crushed down by the armed police and shootings and things of their own people. And they don't have anything to inspire them with. And you can only control people by pure brute force for so long. And living in the terror of them that those leaders live in.
Finally, I would say whatever we can encourage our government to do, to encourage the Chinese government to do, to pay attention to its intellectuals. I mean, our policies have to be directed, which means freedom of speech, freedom of internet, things like these. Those are the incremental steps we can encourage your senators, your House of Representatives. I mean,
absolutely right.
you know, to work on that. And we shouldn't be giving the rulers of China today a free rein with internet. I mean, for example, the government, I think, should be forcing Google and Yahoo to pull out. Our participation in that is disgusting. You know, that we would limit the free speech of Chinese people through we're using our technical power to make money to limit their freedom of speech. It's disgusting. That's not American. Yeah. So let's move on to the next.
This lady had a question. Yeah.
I think my thoughts on the subject, and I like to get to respond and say if you agree, disagree, whatever.
Okay. We'll repeat your question.
Okay. So it seems to me that China, I mean the young people in China and the Chinese Communist Party, they're very, very extremely proud of themselves. They're proud of their history. They're proud of what they accomplished. What they get from the West is disrespect. You're bad. You're polluted. You're not doing things right, et cetera, so they're hostile. And they don't want to listen to us when we say, get out of Sudan, respect the Tibetan people. What if we were to change the tone of that discourse and applaud them for what they have done well, you know, reasonably spreading the results of, you know, modernization well around the populace, encouraging education, et cetera, invite them to the G8, and, you know, encourage them to take on an increased role for the most powerful, or if the most powerful nation on earth they are, that on track one do that, then on the second diplomatic track behind the scenes be like, it's so great to have you with us, what can you do about Sudan? What can you do about Tibet? Could you help us out? Could you maybe tone down the rhetoric in the state media? You know, allow that to cool down, and then let's see test the waters, like have a closed door meeting with Dalai Lama, see what can happen there.
Well, that you're describing current U.S. policy towards China today. Yeah, unfortunately that's my quick answer. That's been the policy since Nixon. That's in Bush. It's a two-track policy, and it just unfortunately is not working. I wish it were getting better results, but from what I can see, it's not.
Well, you know, there is if you want to go on a sort of hardball level, what Tom says is right. Actually, what you're describing is the way the Dalai Lama is. He says they should be proud, they're a great nation, blah, 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 but they should also look at their human rights issues and so on. So he does a two-track thing like that. And my book is showing how it is in totally their enlightened self-interest to behave in an enlightened manner, in this case, rather than an old-fashioned crush and destroy manner. But, on the other hand, we have seen in our lifetime, you were just a little girl, but we've seen in our lifetime the Soviet Union walk out of Eastern Europe without a shot being fired, because they were boycotted economically, and because they didn't get a chance to have fun, and they had long lines to get an icebox, and they didn't get any Apple computers, and they didn't get Google and Yahoo, and they were really bored, and they had no good. They were eating potatoes and borscht day and night, and they were sick of it, and everyone acts like they were so weak. They are not weak, the Russians. They are really stronger. They are much more individual, man for man, stronger than we are, woman for woman. They live in a very hard climate, and they drink more vodka, and they just got sick of being so bored because we've squeezed them. Similarly, we squeezed South Africa, and they suddenly brought Nelson. Well, Dalai Lama wrote Nelson Mandela, get off the violence campaign of the African National Congress and go to nonviolence, which he did. And then that gave him more power, actually, because nonviolence is more powerful. And then they had to talk to them, and then we've seen apartheid go down through economic pressure, through denial of goodies to people who enjoy goodies. So then Bush won. Oh, that worked great with Russia. And let's not do that with China. Let's give them everything, even though they're crushing their people and screwing with the Tibetans and messing everybody up. Let's not do what just worked. Let's do when did we last do that? Build up a dictator in super economic terms? Actually, we did it with Hitler. Yeah. If you happen to know the story, in the 1930s, Bush's grandfather was part of a bank that gave that they saw Hitler as the bastion against socialism in Germany, and they built up the Nazi party in the 30s. And then how did they have to control that? Terrible. Well, I'm not saying that, so in other words, making a dictatorship rich gives them money to buy more weapons and to also and we sell them crowd control equipment and, you know, chips to put in their people to control them. And actually, we talk about integrating with them. We're becoming more suppressive of our own freedom of speech and everything in mimicking them rather than them becoming more democratic. So on a certain level, it's been very hypocritical of our corporate people to pretend, and actually they don't even care for the Chinese. They actually just do it because they broke the labor unions here in America, they built all this cheap stuff there, and they made more money, and the shareholders did, but the people lost all their jobs, and finally now the bill has come due, and there's no more consumers to go to Walmart. They're all homeless. Or lots of them are, actually, in some class apparently below yours, because you're looking baffled. But believe me, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people in this country that are really hurting today because of these bad policies. They finance their credit cards with the stupid mortgages that then were packaged, et cetera, and nobody's really paying the bill. Yeah, okay.
Back there in the back.
Yes, okay.
Far back.
Yes. Yeah, that's just superstition. Yeah, there were a lot of Tibetans killed in the earthquake, actually. Oh.
I was afraid you were going to the Sharon Stone thing,
know,
and
poor
I was gonna really put you down. But no, that's a great
that's
question.
what Sharon was out of line.
Did everybody hear the Sharon Stone thing?
No.
She did the Jerry Falwell New Orleans thing. She did the Jerry Falwell 911 thing. We've been bad, so they come to get us, sort of thing. But no, what he's saying is, repeat that. It's Chen Robel. So Chen Robel, the. Yes.
Indication of the corruption in the rural areas.
Yes.
That picture in the New York Times of the official kneeling like that?
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Never seen before. Yeah.
Chernobyl tragedy in Russia.
Yes, which helped to bring down ultimately.
The shoddiness of the nuclear
Yes. I think it's a really interesting comparison, and we are certainly in interesting times in China. The way that the government of China was forced to allow foreign journalists into Sichuan province. Really, that was remarkable, the degree of free coverage that was given. Okay, it was in the party's interest to get sympathy with the Western public, but still, they were really forced to do that. And I think the Olympics, and remember the Dalai Lama has said all along, he wants the Olympics to go forward. He wants you to go to the Olympics. He wants worldwide attention on this. There's a reason. And I think the Chen Robel thing it's an interesting, I personally, this is sort of what I believe the Dalai Lama is saying, that engagement with China is, I'm not so pro-engagement myself personally. The Dalai Lama is. I mean, he really does.
So am I.
Yeah, we're kind of different on this. I'm a little more hardliner. But I do think there are transformations going on in China, and you can't hold on to power forever over the Chinese people. The Chinese people are great people. It's a great civilization. We've got to get along peacefully with them. We've got to figure it out. So engagement is the way. And I think the earthquake has helped to open up coverage. And I think when the next incident, so now say Olympics happen, you're going to have more journalists in there and more coverage. We are in interesting times. I think change could come very quickly in China when it happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. President Hu is going to do it.
There are 5 symbols, sort of cartoon mascots associated with the Olympics.
2 of them are Tibetan animals, yeah.
Right, and they represent fire, water, etc. And the 5 disasters that have already taken place in China this year. A lot of people who tend to be a little more superstitious over there at times are wondering if there isn't, in fact, a lesson in this, that somehow China has
Well, sure. Listen, there's lessons in anything for anybody who wants to learn lessons. That's the thing. We are lifelong learning people, and we should learn it. Yes, ma'am, with the red shirt, that lady, and then you, the other lady. Yes? Is it possible to change what?
In this country.
Absolutely. Did I hear yes we can somewhere? Huh? Yes we can. And I'm telling all the white racists, he's only half black. Could be worse. And he's really smart. And he's great. I think it's tremendous. And you know what Barak means in Arabic? It means a blessing. Barak. It means the blessings of God.
Who knows?
What do you mean, who knows? He definitely means it. What?
I'm
What?
a very cynical man. I've seen too many people shot dead in front of my face. I grew up at a time when we shot a lot of politicians in the street like dogs.
You did? Where was that?
The United States, 1960s, we shot a number.
Oh, yes, yes.
And so I'm just fearful. I hope that Barack can bring the change that he's leading us. I hope this can be a period in time of coming forward. Will it happen? I don't know.
But it's not him. By the way, his movement, he says it's us. He doesn't say, I'm going to save you. He's like being more intelligent than they've been lately. So maybe we should vote for John McCain because he says he's going to save us. And he's going to take us to victory in Iraq. Hey, what have we got? We're going to win something there. 52 permanent gas stations. I mean, come on. That's expensive gas stations, $1 trillion gas stations. I mean, that's so ridiculous. It really is ridiculous. This is a good sign. You see, the military-industrial Rambo rulers, they've so much lost their bearings in a world that doesn't want this anymore. We don't need people running up and down the streets of Atlanta in tanks. It's ridiculous. And so we don't need to pay $1 million a tank anymore. We need $1 million for school. We need $1 million for a mass transit system. We need $1 million for a lot of things, solar energy. We don't need $1 million for tanks. But they are so desperate to keep their sort of military-industrial, the mighty power, the greatest, and they flatter us that we're the greatest when we're all totally broke. Like my credit card, the credit card's getting hot in my pocket as they're telling me I'm greatest. And and it's up to us to step up and say, forget about it, guys. We're not behaving like that. We don't need that. We want this and this and this, which we need and we deserve and we pay for and we want it. And you're our employee and get out of there. If you broke a law, get out of there. We want you to see the judge and not the judge you own, but the real judge.
Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah.
How does that play into your plan, economic pressure on China when they're holding our debt so we can live and work an easier life?
It's breaking down the system.
The Wall Street Journal had, I don't read the Wall Street Journal normally, but I was reading it yesterday. Yeah. And there was a huge article about that I was fascinated by, the amount of debt that they're holding and what would happen if they weren't holding it to us. And and this is one of the things the Dalai Lama is saying is that in this interconnected world, we can't afford an adversarial relationship with the Chinese people.
And vice versa.
And they don't want an adversary. They need those factories to run so they have jobs. We need to continue having money come from them, but to keep our spendthrift ways going. But I think there's some middle ground where we could try and have some. It's like she was saying about the second line. I don't think we've pushed the second track hard enough. We've just been.
Well, that's my book.
Nobel
Prizes all around.
We haven't pushed the second track hard enough at a government level. If we could get the Chinese government to say, okay, look, you want these jobs from us, we want to do production there. It's good for both of us. We want you to continue to lend to us. You want to have a place of respect and power in the world. There's got to be some middle ground where we say to the party, look, you're going to have to open up freedom of speech a little bit in China so that you're representing the people rather than just the oligarchs. There can be incremental steps towards this. I think it's possible to have incremental steps because if we don't take incremental steps, you're either going to have economic, collapse as we go through a really rough transition or war. So the only choice we have is to find incremental steps. If we don't pressure the party now and say, you've got to reflect the aspirations of the people of China, you've got to let some democracy in there. If we don't put a little pressure on them now, later it will be war. So we've got to take those steps now.
Yes, ma'am.
I've got the part about engaging and how he feels about engaging and reaching out, but
Loving.
I'm wondering what you all are, if you have any feelings about the Olympics and some of the protests with the torch carrying and all that, and boycotting the Olympics. Do you have any feelings about using the Olympics at all in terms of manipulating more of a power situation or not?
I think that, as the Dalai Lama said, he supports the Olympics and he likes to see them go well. It's up to world leaders whether they want to go or not for this or that part. That's their business. And he says, but he thinks the Chinese should learn to tolerate dissent. And they should allow protest. And they should revel in showing that they allow it. And if they were properly advised, listen, I'm giving them free PR advice. Helen Knowlton gets $10 million a year for giving them stupid advice. Like, go hide them. Don't let anybody see anybody marching. I like to see some nice, strong, handsome athletes streaking for Tibet, painted red, white, and blue across the whatever, running across the thing with the flag. Wouldn't that be fun? I'll streak for Tibet.
Let the athletes do it.
I think that's the kind of thing, but what they're doing foolishly is they're checking everybody's visa, and they're getting all paranoid, which is too bad. They should try not to do that. One thing, though, I did want to say to this young lady in her question, I wanted to just say, in part of the premise of your question, the young people who go around protesting and they do this and do that, and they act all mad and nationalistic and they charge on the American embassy when we accidentally bombed the Yugoslavian embassy and all this kind of thing. That's very pumped up and managed, actually. It is not that totally deep. They know themselves that they're getting propaganda, and there's very few who are educated who really think that, this and that somebody is their big enemy and the French are trying to take away something from them and all that. There's really very few. They're very much managed. They can turn it on and turn it off. The Jiangs, there's an article that should give us all hope. I don't know if you saw it, Tom. It was reported by a guy named, I think, Hill or Hall, and I have it in my computer somewhere, by a journalism professor at Beijing University called Zhang Guobiao, in which that journalism professor wrote an article saying he was encouraged by elders to write. And in it, he wrote that the Jiang Zemin Propaganda Department, which is what it's called, founded by Jiang Zemin when he was head of the military and president of China, is doing China a disservice, and it is making them make ridiculous statements and engage in ridiculous policies that the rest of the world thinks are laughable. And no civilized country, which China wants to be now, accepted as a civilized country, etc., built up, powerful, wealthy, civilized country, has such a propaganda department, and even referred to Goebbels, and Goebbels' statement that a lie repeated 1,000 times becomes the truth. And he really blasted them in fact, a very vitriolic manner. And he's still at Beijing University. He's still a journalism professor there. So it's not quite as completely monolithic, the Chinese nationalism, as they would like it to be. It's the one thing they can sort of mobilize people, but a lot of an American student who'd been 4 or 5 years in Shanghai, fluent in Chinese, lives there. All his friends, and he knows lots of them in Shanghai, they're just chuckling about this boycott Carrefour and all these protests. And the more sophisticated ones just know that's silly, and they're trying to hack their way around the blocks in Cisco and Google and Yahoo and get real information about what happens. So they know they're being fed propaganda. So you shouldn't feel that they're all like that. There's no such monolithic thing as China does this or China does that. There's all kinds of people, and and those who are educated are really smart, and they're not that easily manipulated. And therefore, I would say about our people, the leaders who are still trying to lead all these countries like superpowers or imperialist powers or military-industrial complexes, they're kind of desperate to show off that somehow we need them. And we need, though, that ridiculous expenditure that we spend every year on this military thing, because somebody's after us, Meanwhile, our own cities are crumbling, and our schools are in a mess, and our health system is a disaster. It's a train wreck. And they're like, but they're acting desperate. They're doing silly things. Like Margaret Thatcher, the heroine of the Falkland Islands. Ronald Reagan conquered Grenada. I mean, well, he was running away from Lebanon. At least he was smart enough to run away from Lebanon. And unlike these current morons. And we all know, but somehow we're all still convinced that we have to be afraid that we have no power to change anything. We'll never see the good thing happen. Sky will fall on us if we speak our mind and we be honest and say what we think. And it's just all like this. We're controlled by fear. And they are too. And we have to stop that because these people are so desperate. They're charging off off a cliff. They're like the leaders of lemmings. And we don't want to go off a cliff. Okay, thank you.
Two more.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's get somebody way in the back. That one right
Okay,
there.
okay, that lady. Yes, yes, yes. What? Yes, ma'am. I'm deaf. I have to go. What?
What is one thing that we can do when we meet here that can help?
Read his book and my book. Or not go get it from the library. It's cheaper than Amazon. But read our books.
And once you've read our books, every time you go into a store to buy anything, it's a teaching experience for the other people. Those people are paid to buy from you, to sell you things. So when you go into the store and you go to Whole Foods and you want to buy your frozen edamame and it says made in China, you ask for the manager of the store and you say to them, "Excuse me, don't we grow soybeans in the United States? You know, why is it that we need to import soybeans from China at a time when so many products coming out of China are carcinogenic?" So every time you buy shoes, you go into a store, it's like, "I want to buy some shoes today. I'm willing to spend $110. Show me a pair not made in China."
Uh-oh.
Right?
Well, sure.
Every purchase you make can be a teaching experience. It's up to each of you. That's the foundation. That's one thing you can do. If you ask me for one thing, that's it.
I know another thing. Write a letter to George Bush. I just had a great idea. Write a letter to W. Write a letter to George Bush. And he called up Hu Jintao and said, Hey, who? Mr. Who? You be nice to that Dalai Lama and you meet with him. I'll give you a gold medal. I'll give you one before I leave. You come on over here, you have your own gold medal. Just talk to that Dalai Lama. You go meet him, you talk to that man. Talk to him for 2 hours. And have tea with him. And I'll give you your own gold medal. Right, George Bush? That'd be a positive thing.
One more question in the blue.
That's the kind of thing he could do. Excuse me.
There are hundreds of millions of people around the world that know the Dalai Lama is homeless.
It's what?
Homeless.
Yes.
Without a country.
Right.
Yes.
And I fully support him returning to his homeland
Yes.
and taking leadership. But since you guys have his ear, can you ask him to think bigger now that we're in a new millennium and to consider being a father figure for our entire global family?
Sure. Yeah, I did ask him that in my book. In my book, I asked him after he wrote, if you read his book called Ethics for the New Millennium, that's another thing you could do.
Yeah.
Ethics for the New Millennium. It's really, really wonderful vision of how we should be in the new millennium, especially carrying the banner of nonviolence, intelligent nonviolence, not stupid nonviolence being trampled on, but intelligent nonviolent resistance and dialogue and reconciliation. It's a really excellent book. And so read that. And I asked him after he wrote, I said, "Are you ready to be a prophet unto the nations?" He said, "Oh, hell no." And then I said, he misunderstood me. He thought I meant predict the future. That notion of prophet, but not the Judaic Old Testament idea of prophet of speaking truth to power. He is doing that. He's ready to do that. That's why he matters. And he should, and he gets along with all these weirdos in the government. And they should listen to him, that's all. And I'm glad to, but one thing I want you not to worry. A Buddhist monk is professionally homeless. When they take their vow, they say, "I now go from home to homelessness." So he's not worried about going home. He's at home in Emory. He loves Emory. He loves India. He'll be happy in Beijing. He'll be happy in Tibet. But the people who are homeless are the Tibetan people, because many of them are in exile, but the majority of them they have other people living on top of them in their home. And he wants them to have their home back, because they are not necessarily all monks. So that's what we have to visualize the happy Tibet with the free Tibetans, part of China, fine, but a free part of China. That's what we have to visualize. Okay, thank you very much. Tony.